I recently got an email from a student who is struggling with her listening comprehension in Norwegian. Now, that's a very common problem, and if you're struggling with the same issue, I'd like to invite you to watch this video until the end because her case is really interesting and she allowed me to share it with you. So let's dive right into what she wrote to me. I am a B1-2 in Norwegian, but when I visit Norway and Sweden, I can't understand general conversations. My cousins are all Swedish. I am currently discouraged, which is why I'm writing in English. Do you have any suggestions? Now, as I said before, listening comprehension is really troublesome. Compare it to reading. When you read a text that's too complicated, you can read it 5 times. You can read it slowly. You can look up the words you don't understand in the dictionary. So there are so many options. When you're listening to something, you hear a sentence on the radio, you don't understand it, it's gone, there's nothing you can do about it. So, of course, that is really tricky. Yeah, but there is another thing. The student mentions that she's at the level B1, and B1 together with A2 is really the hell of language learning, because we're not yet good enough to see our fluency. At the same time, we're too good to see our progress. What does that mean? When we learn 10 new words at the A2, B1 level, it doesn't change anything anymore. At the beginning, of course, it's a big thing. This week you can count to 10, next week you can count to 20 in Norwegian, big difference. But at the A2, B1 level, you don't see this anymore. And at the same time, you're not as good yet that you can just use the language without any bigger effort and just interact with native speakers in everyday life without worrying too much how that will go. So unfortunately, B1 is a level where it is not yet normal to just understand general conversations of native speakers without any problem. It's normal that we don't understand them. So yeah, that's frustrating. That doesn't help. I'll get back to that later. But there's something more. The student is mentioning that she would like to talk Swedish to her cousins while she's learning Norwegian. Maybe you're not familiar with it, but Norwegian and Swedish are really similar languages. They're so similar that we might consider them the dialects of the same language. The Norwegians and the Swedes don't like to hear that, but that's just a reality. Still, native speakers will understand each other. People who are fluent, who learned either Norwegian or Swedish, will understand the other language without bigger problems. But if you're at the B1 level, it's not normal to understand Swedish without any issues. So, of course, I know that's maybe not the answer that we were hoping for at this point, but it is normal at the B1 level to still have these issues. Now, of course, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, so I asked the student, what exactly are you doing right now to improve your listening comprehension? And this is what she wrote to me. I also speak Spanish at about a B1 and have the same problem. Part of my problem is lack of motivation right now, although I continue to press on with what I mentioned below and Duolingo. Now, I understand this frustration. As I said, it's the hell of language learning, and motivation is not something we can buy at the pharmacy, as I always say. But there are 2 things we can do. One of them the student is already doing, and that's really, really good. I continue to press on. That means, when you're walking through hell, keep walking. So she's doing that. She is continuing, even though it's frustrating, even though she doesn't see the progress. Super good at that level. If you have habits, if you have routines where you go and say, okay, I don't feel like it, but I'm going to learn a little bit of Norwegian today, even though I will not see any change immediately. Of course, eventually you're going to see the change, but right now it's frustrating and we need to tolerate that. But there is something more we can do about the frustration, and that is that we choose materials that we actually enjoy. And that's, by the way, the reason why I always build my own language courses around absurd stories, because it's more fun to work with them when just with random material. So let's look at what exactly the student is working with. For listening comprehension, 1, I listen to a 20-minute podcast 3 times a week. I think I understand about 50%. This is one of the worst pieces of advice I keep hearing from Norwegian teachers, that they tell people at a relatively low level, listen to the radio, listen to the news, watch TV, listen to podcasts. It doesn't work. Just think about it logically. If you were to learn Japanese, would you just download 25 hours of podcast in Japanese, listen to it for weeks and months, and then suddenly you would speak Japanese? Of course not. It would not work. So if you're listening to something where you understand 50% only, your brain is just going to shut off. It's going to say, this is noise. This is nothing I can do with. Okay? Super frustrating, 0 learning effect. When you want to improve your listening comprehension, you need to choose material where you understand most of it, 80%, better 90%. It should be a little bit difficult, it should be a little bit challenging. When you understand 100%, it's not helpful either. So Duolingo, that's too easy. Duolingo is nice to repeat vocabulary at the A1, A2 level, to play around a little bit, great. But to improve listening comprehension at the B1 level, no, it's too easy. So the podcasts are too difficult, the Duolingo is too easy. Let's see what else the student is doing. I started listening to books on tape, but haven't done this seriously for about 6 months. Mostly they are my sleep aid now, and it doesn't involve active listening. The ones I understand most are for kids around 12 years old, David Williams for an example. Children's books are usually underrated. Children's books are written for kids to enrich the vocabulary in their native language. And the 12-year-old kid has a huge vocabulary. So we know that children's books have, on average, a richer vocabulary than non-fiction books for adults in the same language. So therefore, I don't usually like to recommend this too much. Of course, it depends a little bit on the book. Some books are written in a simple way, and then you can challenge yourself with them. Or, of course, when you're reading a book, it's still easier because, as I said before, you can look up words as many times as you want, and you can read slowly and so on. You cannot do that with listening. So if you're listening to a kid's book, then it has to be either so simple that you understand, again, 80 to 90%, or it has to be a book that you have read before and you know what's going on. You might still benefit if you understand a little bit less, but still, if you understand 70% or less, forget about it. It's too difficult. So what should you listen to, actually? I'm always telling what you should not do, but what should you listen to? So at the B1 level, this can still be material that is designed for language learning. So the stories of my courses, for example, in my Norwegian courses, of course, we took out all the difficult vocabulary, and the people who record it speak a little bit slower than in usual everyday speech, and that's normal at the B1 level. So you might want to listen to these stories again and again. You can stream them for free. So that's one option. Another option is children's cartoons. I always recommend Peppa Pig. They don't pay me money for it, but Peppa Pig is cool because it's really simplified vocabulary, short episodes, and you have the cartoons. So even once in a while when you don't understand words, you will still get what is actually going on. So that's super underrated. And yes, I know it's childish. As adults, sometimes you don't want to do it, but that's also cute, no? It's also fun to watch a kid's cartoon. And then you have this motivational spark where you go, hey, I understood that. That's quite cool, actually. Number 3, I have tried to find Norwegian-speaking people here, but it is more just a hello. I talk to 2 of my Swedish cousins on the phone once a month, but because it is difficult, we switch to English after about 10 minutes, or if the topic is important. So I see the same pattern again. Interacting with Norwegians for these super short conversations, too easy, like just saying hello. The waiter asks you whether you want sugar or milk with your coffee. Too easy at the B1 level. Cool if you do that for the first time after learning Norwegian for 1 month or 2 months, then it's fun, but at the B1 level, too easy. Talking to your Swedish friend on the phone, too difficult. Yeah. Working with Swedish at this point might just not be realistic. You should find somebody who can talk to you in Norwegian. And then when it's a native speaker, usually we need to set a few frameworks. One is that we need to prevent them from switching to English. So whether it's a teacher or a friend or whoever, we need to make sure, okay, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever is the time that we set for each other, we're going to speak Norwegian, we're going to stick to it. And if you say one word of English, you're going to pay a penalty of, I don't know, 20 kroner. And at the end of the month, we're going to buy beer from it, something like that. Because it has to be super strict, otherwise the temptation of switching to English or to another language that you speak well is just too big. So we must prevent this from happening. And secondly, the native speaker must be willing to simplify the language a little bit, repeat a lot, speak slowly, use easier words, shorter sentences, and all of that. So you need to find somebody who is willing to do that, and then it can be super beneficial. But just talking to somebody randomly on the phone on any topic you want to talk, and especially then still if it's someone who doesn't even speak the same language but a similar language, it's just way too challenging at this level, and that's totally normal. Unfortunately, I know, a bit frustrating, so we need a bit more patience there. Yes, in the end, you will be able to speak to Swedish people when you're fluent in Norwegian, but not yet at the B1 level. Number 4, NRK Kids Christmas series, but I find I rely on the subtitles reading. I guess you know the answer by now. If you rely on the subtitles, too difficult, drop it, go back to Peppa Pig. Very simple test. 5, I have Spotify and listen to slower songs, and when there are lyrics, I try to learn them. I love the idea of learning languages through music. When we hear a word in a song and it's linked to the melody and the emotion that the music conveys, perfect. So easy to remember what the lyrics are about. But we have to read the lyrics and we have to understand what is going on, and lyrics are usually quite difficult. So great way of improving your vocabulary, horrible for listening comprehension. I don't understand songs in my native language. Why would I understand it at a B1 level at the language I'm learning? I don't know who put this idea out into the world. It's just not realistic. So it's normal that you have trouble understanding songs. And it can be something, if you enjoy it and you like to enrich your vocabulary through that, please by all means do it, but it will not help you improve your listening comprehension. A lot of this email is complaining, but I haven't been able to progress and wondered if you had any other suggestions. I love the 2 Niels books and the story. Okay, it's cool that you love the Niels books, but about the other suggestions. So I gave you already 2, I'm going to give you 1 more. So just to sum up, avoid using too difficult materials. It has to be materials where you understand, I would say 90%. It has to be a little bit difficult, but you need to find these materials, number 1. Number 2, interact with native speakers in a framework where you make English illegal and where they are willing to accommodate their speech so that you can follow along. And number 3, and often underrated, pronunciation training. Practice your pronunciation, because when we practice our mouth to produce Norwegian sounds, we equally train our ears to distinguish Norwegian sounds, and that helps our listening comprehension a lot. So pronunciation is underrated in general, is underrated for listening comprehension. So make sure to watch the pronunciation videos on this channel and feel free to subscribe if you want to hear more about learning Norwegian.